In at number 10, we have the Carno. And the reason why I would say this is a dangerous creature is it is one of the faster carnivores about on the island. And I know there are some other creatures which you may think, like the Thyla, but I'm not putting the Thyla on this list as they aren't as common around the map. But, you know, if you really do think Thylas are the most dangerous thing in the world, I don't know why I've never really had a struggle with Thylas. Then just pretend I'm talking about Thylas and not Carnos here. But with the Carno, they deal the bleed damage, again like the Thyla, so maybe I'll feel obliged to put the Thyla in this spot as well, because the Thyla isn't on the list. Yeah, Thyla and Carno in at number 10, because they deal the bleed ability, they're pretty mobile, and especially with the Carno, they do spawn like absolutely everywhere. And they are pretty easy to trap on normal Ark and ASA. Obviously, they're a little bit harder because of the Dino AI, so they avoid traps now, which is a new and innovative feature. And actually, when I tamed a Carno on ASA, it was a lot more of a pain to get it in. And with RGs as well, they're a lot more of a pain. Like, just so much more of a pain because they don't want to go in the trap. It makes sense. To be honest, a creature wouldn't really do that in real life, but you can still get them in if you just keep going around in circles. Eventually, it will happen. You kind of just need to get around quick enough that it doesn't have time to think through it. But yeah, Carno and Styler in at number 10. In at number 9, we have the UT. But why would I put the UT in at this spot? Well, the main reason for it is that roaring ability really is lethal if you end up in the wrong place at the wrong time and it roars, and you really can end up in a huge predicament with this thing. And they deal quite a hefty amount of damage as well. Like, I know a lot of people don't really think of the UT for dealing loads of damage, as you don't really use it for that, you use it for its roars. It deals a very hefty amount of damage, and it has some pretty fast mobility as well. If you ever try to tame a UT, which is probably most of us to be honest, you'll know how fast these things are, but for people who haven't, the UTs are pretty fast, and you should definitely be careful of these creatures around, as you really do not want to get into a fight with a UT, unless obviously you're very well prepared. Then I think you'll be fine. But, you know, still, UT definitely a dangerous creature, and that's why I put it in at the number 9 spot. Next up, we've got the Rex, and this is just one of those creatures where you kind of have to put it on the list. Although they are quite slow creatures and kind of easy to avoid, the Rex stand kill can still be a big challenge for many Ark players out there, as you struggle to get away from it sometimes, especially in ASA. Now, you can't level up movement speed unless you obviously enable the setting. It's kind of like fly speed leveling, like Wildcard removed it, but they never really got rid of it because you could always enable that setting single player. But still, it is now harder to run away from Rexes than it ever has been before, although they are so much easier to tame because of those Rex babies. Honestly, that is an absolute hack for taming Rexes on ASA. Definitely advise it if you've never done that already, and obviously have ASA, as I know a lot of my viewers don't actually have ASA at the moment because it's too darn expensive, and it's also quite a pain to run, although most of my viewers do seem to be console ones, and me being a PC player, I'm upgrading my computer actually to play this game even better. But I've heard on consoles that actually runs pretty well. But to talk about the Rex, you can say it's a dangerous creature. It definitely falls into that bracket, and they're quite common as well. Just maybe not the fastest, so if you have tons of movement speed, you should be fine. Right, in at number 7, we have got the Spino. And why do I think the Spino is the 7th most dangerous creature on the island? Well, the reason mainly for it is its speed. It is one of the fastest carnivores out there, and it is pretty lethal in the water as well, which most other carnivores really can't hold up, as things like the Rex, they really can't swim well at all. And, you know, you try and go into the water, that Rex is never going to catch up with you, even a player on really slow movement speed, unless obviously the water's shallow enough and it can just walk itself along over the top of it. But with the Spino, you can't really get that, and they tend to spawn in more hostile areas as well. Although they don't really spawn around other more hostile creatures, they tend to spawn in places like the snow biome on the island, which is a lot more of a hostile environment than just the general South Zone one, which players will experience as they spawn in. And yet again, that water ability of them just being able to be really good swimmers is something which makes them a lot more deadly, and also they have the bleed ability, so they deal even more damage there. They really do pack a punch when it comes to damage, although if you've got enough, like, you've got good enough armor, you can probably just face them off in melee, as their health isn't the greatest, although still a very dangerous creature, and it will take a pretty powerful weapon to do that without killing yourself, and also doing that before your armor breaks. Now, next up we have the Theory, and the first thing I have to say, this thing's saddle is unlocked at level 69. And yes, what a nice thing for it to have, but that's not why it is dangerous. The 69 curse, although present in the Theory saddle, doesn't mean you have to obviously tame this thing at that level, and actually they are pretty difficult for taming because they're kind of dangerous, and also because they take a while, especially on official settings, although very well worth it, especially for defeating the dragon on the island. But why are these things so deadly? Well, they don't really appear to be so hostile, and if you go close to them, they will just chase you for ages and ages and ages, and you really can't get them off of your back. And you know, that is a pretty irritating thing with a creature. Yeah, they can be dangerous, but if they de-aggro quickly, then you're not really going to have an issue. Whereas these things just never, ever seem to give up, and they just keep battling and battling and battling over and over again, just across the whole island map. I know that is a little bit of hyperbole there, but still, these things have an incredible long aggro distance, and that kind of really makes them extremely dangerous, and their damage is also ridiculously high. But it kind of makes sense. They do have massive claws. That would hurt. In at number 5, we have the Allosaurus, and this creature had to be here. It is so fast, and it deals the bleed ability, and they usually come in packs, and they spawn in hostile regions of the map. So they're pretty hard to deal with, especially because they come in packs. That can be a very tough thing to get around, because maybe you'll be able to take off one really easily like that, but trying to take on 3, that is a completely different story, and it's going to require significantly more effort for you to put in to actually be able to defeat all of those creatures. That's why they're a lot more dangerous, especially if you're a solo player, which actually I'm not sure what the statistics are like. I'm not sure if most Ark players are multiplayer or solo players, as in, like, not as in they play on servers and they play on single player, but as in like they play with friends or they just play by themselves on multiplayer servers. Not actually sure, but I think it's more single player heavy, so you're more likely to be playing Ark solo, at least from my experience. For you, you might have never played Ark solo and you always play with friends, and I might be sounding like a complete idiot right now, but from my experience, Ark is usually a solo game for me, and on single player, especially earlier, even to the mid game, even sometimes in the late mid game, these things are just a no-go. You just don't go near these things. But then in the late game, they're not the worst thing ever. You can deal with a pack of them, but maybe 2 packs would be a little bit too far, unless you've just got the full tech charade, and then you'd be alright with no issues at all, and there's not really a point about talking about these creatures. But at that point, you can pretty much kill every Ark creature with absolute ease. That, you know, frankly, is any creature dangerous at that point? The only thing that would really be dangerous is things like turrets. They do a lot of damage. Next up, we've got the Microraptor, and I had to put this thing on the list here, as this thing, if you're flying in the air and it knocks you off your flying mount, or any mount if you're in any kind of combat, you can have yourself some serious issues, as you may not be able to defend yourself, and also you'll be stunned at the same time. You can kind of say the Polovia is in a similar spot to this creature, so kind of do the same thing, although these things can fly, which is why I put them here instead. It is a really lethal and frankly quite unfair ability for a creature to have, and that is why for a creature this small, it is insane that it is this deadly. Seriously, beware of Microraptors. In at number 3, we have the Giga, and the Tiny Tim is obviously an absolute beast of the Ark space, and you really can't get over this being like a really powerful and deadly, dangerous creature. Well, it is the most dangerous creatures on the island after all, and there really pretty much isn't anything more dangerous than this thing. Obviously, once tamed, it does have the rage meter, and a wild one is significantly more dangerous than a tamed one, but we are talking about wild ones, so it kind of makes sense. These things are absolutely insane in the wild, and still insane once tamed. Just they lose their bleed ability, then they get the rage meter, so they don't really have the health which they say. It's like a little bit of a lie, because you only get a certain percentage of it. But, you know, still really, really OP. And when they were introduced into the game, they were like one of the like beast creatures on the map, and you know, you couldn't really discount them for that. But yeah, the Giga's in at number 3. Let's continue on with the list. In at number 2, we have the Carcharodontosaurus, and this is just essentially the Giga on steroids, which is why I have put it on this spot in the list, of course. And you know, I do think it is very deserving of this spot in the list, as it is an extremely powerful creature, dealing a wealth of damage with just, frankly, that blood rage is something which is absolutely insane. Also, I don't really recommend taming the Carcharodontosaurus on the island. Do it on Ragnarok, as they're so much more common, as you're really not going to find these things that often on Ark. And compared to the creature on number 1, these are some of the most rare creatures out there, unless you're just playing normal Ark. If you're playing ASA, then they won't be like as rare as the creature in number 1, maybe kind of equal to, really. But on ASA, the creature in at number 1 is just, it spawns absolutely everywhere. I kind of feel like there's a bit of an overspawn. But before we do get into the creature which is in at number 1, just a couple quick honourable mentions. I know I've kind of put the Thyla in at number 10, although it wasn't really on the list. I'll mention it again. And the Megalosaurus, and obviously the Titanosaur, because that creature I didn't put on the list, and I don't think it's too dangerous, because if you go up and you just attack a Titanosaur, isn't that a little bit stupid? And the creature in at number 1 will just attack you no matter what. So let's get into that creature. And in at number 1 is the Rhyniognatha, and did you really expect anything else? Especially on ASA, because these things spawn absolutely everywhere. It's actually kind of insane, and I'm a little bit disturbed in a way at how much they spawn. They only spawn on the island and Lost Island, actually, in these locations, or if you want just a broad term, the swamp biome on the island and the Lost Island. And on the older version of Ark, you'll need to use mods like Creature Finder Deluxe if you want to guarantee a quick find. And as you can see, I didn't even have any on my map, so I had to raise my dino count, and then obviously use the command destroy wild dinos, and then boom, you have done a dino wipe on your world. And you know, that just means it's just going to kill the wild dinos on your map. And I think you're supposed to put destroy all wild dinos instead of destroy wild dinos, but it might also be that one. Try both. There's one which is quite similar, which will also kill your own tame creatures, and you really don't want to do that. But the Rhyniognatha, like, basically shoots lasers and deals an insane amount of damage. This thing can also pick up Rexes. That's insane. But at least its tame method is insane, and I'll just quickly run through it. You steal a pheromone from a... Is it pheromone? You steal that from killing a male Rhyniognatha. Get those resources. If you want 100% effectiveness, again, it's not really a boss creature, so I wouldn't say it is very necessary. Then trap it in some way. The net gun is my preferred method, which is obviously why I use the net gun in this example here. Then, similarly to the Reaper, just get its health as low as possible. Sadly, there isn't really an indicator. I'm pretty sure, like, it won't glow a certain colour once you've got it. It may glow orange, but in all of this and through taming it, it didn't glow any colour, so just rely on something like the magnifying glass, or if you have access to mods, use the awesome spyglass. Again, if you're on ASA, no matter what platform, you can use the awesome spyglass, as you can just look up the mod section. Then feed that pheromone, definitely is a pheromone because it just said there, to your Bronto. Yeah, you're going to need a Bronto as well. Don't necessarily need one, but you need a creature for it that will work. The Bronto is just the easiest, best one really, for effectiveness, obviously. And then it will have its craving timers, it will die, so don't choose an important Bronto if that even exists, and then you'll get yourself a Rhyniognatha baby. In at number 10, we have got the Maywing, and there's kind of one main reason at why I'm putting this creature on this list, and it is that it's such an insanely fast travel mount. It is just inherently very OP in nature. Like, you look at this creature, you think of this creature, you think of really speedy travel mounts, and that is just an OP feature in itself, being able to travel around the map with that speed without having to go into creative mode and all of that stuff. And that's not even an option if you're playing on a server. That's only really an option on just a general single player server, and you probably wouldn't do it anyway because it kind of ruins the fun of the game. But still, just I was needing something to compare it to. And although obviously it's not going to go as fast as someone flying around in creative mode, it is going to fly faster than someone in a tech suit, and it's a lot easier to get than a tech suit because you only need to be level 19 to get the saddle for this thing, and then boom, like one of the easiest tames in the game, just trap it before you actually start knocking it out. That kind of goes for most flyers though, or even pretty much every Ark creature that's a knockout tame. It's just so much easier if you do. So yeah, that's the kind of method to the madness. And then you've got yourself a really great, really quick, speedy travel mount that's also a portable feeding trough, and it can gather berries as well. So just a nice little feature for this thing to have. Next up, we got the Thyla, and this thing kind of works for both PvE and PvP players alike out there. This creature really does pack a huge punch in damage department. It also deals the bleed ability, and it can scale any kind of wall or vertical surface, making it a prime creature for raiding people's bases on a PvP server or just in any given PvP scenario. They're also pretty decent on SOTF as well due to their high mobility, and they're not too difficult to tame on SOTF either, or really just not too difficult to tame in general. The only real difficulty is the biome they spawn in, as the redwoods can not be the friendliest of biomes pretty much all the time unless you're extremely lucky, so you always do have to be careful for these things, and like microraptors and all of that. And there are loads of things that want to kill you in the redwoods, but you know, at least Thylas do spawn there, and you can get a lot of great use out of these creatures. So I really do recommend taming one, and I really do think they are extremely OP. The only thing that could make them even more OP is if they were actually allowed into bosses, because when these things came out, they were seen as too overpowered, so then they didn't get the ability to go into bosses. But now with some newer creatures, it's kind of a little bit outdated in the sense that's actually why the Giga is not on this list. It would have been. This was maybe like 2020, 2019, 2018, but that creature is significantly more outdated nowadays than the Thyla, so, you know, that's why that creature's not on the list, if you were ever wondering at any point. But you can see actually this bleed ability in just a second here. I used to not really know what it did. I just thought it was cool, but it does damage on a percent base scale instead of just a general damage dealing scale. So no matter the health of the creature, it will always deal the same percent amount of damage, which is why the bleed ability is so OP. And really, if you do have the time, tame yourself a Thyla. You are definitely not going to regret getting one of these things. They are totally worth it, and considering they spawn on the island, they're extremely accessible to like every single Ark player out there without fail whatsoever. Next up, we have got the Theory, and the reason why it's on this list is not just because its saddle was unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
But purely that this creature is an insane gatherer of so many kinds of resources, including fiber, which is actually one which is considerably harder to get than most other resources in bulk with a creature like this, as most herbivores will just gather berries, whereas this thing can gather berries and fiber, and it's also a pretty OP boss creature as well. It really does deal a lot of damage and pack a punch. You could probably tell it would deal a lot of damage in that kind of general area, because look at how large these things' claws are. And when you look at it, it's, I kind of call it the Freddy Krueger of Ark, if you will, or the Tickle Chicken, just depending on what context you really want. Those claws really do, again, pack a huge amount of damage into this creature. Really useful for the dragon boss fight on the island if you've never done that before, and the fiber gathering really does put them up another level for me, as yes, the moss chops is another great fiber gatherer. It really doesn't do all too much apart from that. I'm pretty sure it's really great at gathering organic polymer as well, but this is a much more OP creature and significantly more useful just to the general Ark player out there, and especially with that saddle level being so perfect, you really can't miss an opportunity on taming one of these things. They're also really great at gathering thatch and wood too, so there's nothing not to love about this creature. So I really do recommend you taming one of these things as soon as you can, really. Next up, in number 7, we have got the RG, and doesn't this creature really deserve to be on the spot for being just such a great PvE creature? And also, I'm pretty sure it's a really great PvP creature as well, although I don't really can think of too many uses off the top of my head for this creature in terms of PvP use, but you know, there are definitely still going to pretty much be all the same uses as for PvE players, as this is a really great traveling mount and it has a heck of a lot of weight. So getting metal from point A to point B, or even maybe to point C if you're feeling like it, will be really easy. And you can also pick up a wealth of creatures with this creature, which definitely does aid this thing in being a really great successful creature, because maybe sometimes with a flyer you do want to actually pick up some creatures like the Desmodus do not have that ability, although that creature is on the list for several other reasons which I think do put it higher on the list than this creature. It also does have a portable smithy as a saddle, so if you ever break a metal tool if you're out farming, well, the RG can just simply help you with that, as long as you have some metal ingots that have been smelted. Of course, you can't just use the normal raw metal, if you didn't know that already. I'm sure pretty much all of you did. There's not really a point to me saying that, but you know, just might as well, because I'm sure someone's done it before. Then you can easily repair all your metal gear, and they also do regen as well. If you quickly kill something and then eat that dead body, then you get a really nice quick regen buff, which is actually, it's pretty useful, and it's a lot more useful, and you'll use it a lot more than maybe you'd expect. Next up, we got the Carcharodontosaurus, and doesn't this creature just objectively have to be really OP? It's a hugely massive carnivore capable of dealing a lot of damage. And I also was going to consider putting the Titanosaur and things like the mech on the list as well. Actually, I might put the mech kind of here at this spot, because I kind of think it deserves to be here as well. Really huge damage dealing thing, but the Titanosaur is hugely outdated nowadays. And obviously you could kind of just chuck all the Titans here as well, although I really tend to avoid those more as they're not permanent creatures, although they still definitely do count as creatures. You can make them permanent, of course, with things like mods and all of that for the Titans, but you know, I tend to stray away from those things. And the Carcharodontosaurus is one of those more powerful creatures you can get. That's not the only reason why a creature can be absolutely OP, but if you go by sheer strength, then this probably is the most powerful creature on the list. You could say maybe some other creatures could be contested against it and to it, and you know, probably just have to get Cantex to do a video on that, and then there you go, you would get the answers. But I'm probably going to say this is the most powerful one. It's somewhat more difficult to tame than the Giga because there are a few more steps. I have a guide on my channel. I'll put it up here if I actually remember to do it. Otherwise, you can just search that. It's not actually too difficult. You just have to be aware for some things, because it can go quite horribly wrong if you don't do it right, and you're just going to be wasting a lot of time, which you know you probably don't want to do. But once you do have one of these things, you really are going to enjoy it. In at number 5, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is here because it is just so jam-packed full of abilities. You really can't deny this creature's absolutely hugely immense strength when it comes to pretty much anything in the Ark space. It is basically uncontested in size and mobility and all of that. There is kind of one other creature which is in the number 3 spot actually, which personally I think it's really OP, but that's for a slightly different reason. But when it comes to maybe pure mobility, this does have a lot more. Like, just look at how high this thing can jump. It also does have the hydration buff, which does play a huge part in having a really OP creature. If you have buffs, the Megatherium is another great shout as well, although not on this list. It definitely wouldn't be more OP than some of these other creatures. I think that creature is actually, yes, still while OP, maybe not one of the most OP, although you could easily put it on this list and have people agreeing with you. You actually may want this thing to be on the list, so I guess I give it a quick mention here. The Shadowmane is just so packed full of abilities though. It's got the hydration buff, it's got pack buffs, it's got all of it. It can charge up damage over time, and it even has natural armor. It really is a great OP creature. Next up, we have got the Reaper, and this thing kind of just had to be here, didn't it? When you think of it, it is just such a big, bulky, huge creature capable of so much damage. Is actually kind of a little bit absurd when you think of it, and it also really does fit into its map very well, but that's not what we're talking about today in this video. We're just talking about a creature that purely deals a lot of damage and also just has great mobility and is generally a really well-rounded creature which is capable of a lot of things. If this was able to go into bosses, then it would be even more OP. It can't though, which is kind of why the creature next up on the list, although maybe not as strong, has a lot of edge over this creature, although you can use it on Extinction for the Titans, although the Giga and the Carcharodontosaurus are the more preferable options. But with loads of new creatures coming out in mods in ASA, I know Extinction is still not here yet, but there may be some other options which people may be kind of becoming more fond to. But either way, just in general terms, the Reaper is a really OP creature. Taming one on Arboration feels like an absolute slog, but a slog that I'm worth going through, and on Gen 2 it's ridiculously easy. So if you don't feel like spending an age going through a huge slog, then tame one on Gen 2 and they're really easy. But once you do have one, you really do feel on top of the world, especially if you do it on Arboration as a process. It's just significantly harder to get it done as on Gen 2. The actual process of taming is obviously the same. And in at number 3, we have got the Deinonychus, and this creature literally does bleeder damage to bosses, which is kind of the main reason why it's here, as that is an ability which no other Ark creature has, and it really does make this thing a hugely more OP creature. The fact that it can deal percentage based damage instead of just raw based damage to boss creatures, it's an insane thing to have, and it can grip onto them and all of that, and it's it's just an insane ability to have, really. It feels like an absolute cheat if you go into bosses with the Rhyniognatha, because obviously you're also going to go with the pack as well. You're going to have pack buffs on top of it. There's just going to be buffs everywhere, and you're going to melt through those bosses so quickly. Obviously, don't do the Titans on Extinction with the Rhyniognatha, but for everything else, these things work really well, and maybe not the Moda actually, because they're not particularly very good underwater creatures, although they still can do a little bit. Just, you know, maybe that's not particularly what they were designed for, so probably don't bring them to the Moda fight. They'll probably drown anyway, so really, I wouldn't try that whatsoever. I don't really know why I'm trying to like convince you to not use these things for the Moda. I'm pretty sure you weren't going to anyway, but you know, I guess that segment happened. Also, these things take no full damage, which is a nice thing, so you don't have to dismount just before you hit the ground, no matter like, no, when you fall from a higher place. Sorry, I don't know what sentence was trying to come out there, but that's never going to happen again. Either way, these things, great mobility, and although maybe their parkouring skills isn't quite as elegant as the Thyla solution, I still really like it, and it works, and once you get the hang of it, it really does act quite well. And at number 2, we've got the Desmodus, and this creature just kind of has to be here because it can go, no, we're not going to talk about that. It can go invisible in the night. It's not why it can go OP. My brain is in a muddle. The reason why is because Sanguine Elixir exists, it's a blood bank farm, and you can also pick players off riders with this thing, which is absolutely OP for given PvP scenarios. That's why it's not because it can go invisible in the night time. I can't even show you that because I recorded all this B-roll on the Wasteland biome, and then I realised that you can't set it tonight. I probably should have gone to the Snow Dome or the Desert Dome, but I didn't. So, you know, but at least you know it exists. These things can also just grab onto walls, like the Tapijara, which is a nice thing. Just don't press E or the dismount button when you're like this. Someone's done it before. Press space or whatever the equivalent button is on console. Not really sure, but, you know, these things, really OP creatures. Sanguine Elixir, absolute cheap for tames. A third of it done like that with a click of a button. And obviously the fact that you can pick people off riders with this thing, insane. Really great for PvP scenarios, and it's also really quick as well. And in at number 1, we have the Rhyniognatha, and the reason why I say this is the most OP Ark creature is it really does feel out of place for just what it can do. The fact that this thing can pick up Rexes and Paraceratherians and all of that just kind of seems a bit out of this world to me, and although they're really useful in ASA at the moment because cryopods don't exist, still they feel really out of place in the general Ark game to me, and kind of maybe too far out of a league that they really shouldn't be going into. And personally, from my opinion, I would like to nerf the Rhyniognatha because I find it way too OP. Personally, also on ASA, I think it should be a little bit rarer. Not quite as rare as it is on just general normal ASE, as you can barely even find those things, but still, on ASA, I feel like there is a little bit of an overspawn there. And you may completely disagree with me on this, and you're happy to, and you can comment down below your thoughts, as I'm always happy to hear your thoughts on creatures like this. But personally, I come from a much earlier stage of Ark playing, from like 2015, 2016, 2017, etc, etc. Going onwards, I did start playing in 2015, so I've been playing Ark for absolutely ages now, and I kind of really like those primitive feelings of the game. Obviously, the game has to evolve, and generally it will kind of just get easier, and there'll be some new, cooler, more OP creatures being added as the game progresses. But I feel like this is a huge step too far, and I don't really know what the Fasilasuchus, I think it is, will be like on Scorched. Maybe that will be even more OP than this thing, and I don't really like the way that this is all going, but it does seem to be quite popular with the general Ark player base, so I guess it's a working marketing solution for wildcards and snail games and those kind of people. But also with the like expansion pack, like extra creatures as well, that's like even more OP. I really don't like the route that it's going with these kind of creatures. Again, you're very happy to disagree with me, but personally I think the Rhyniognatha is too OP. And currently I think it's kind of the most OP Ark Tame out there, just no questions asked. Personally, really not a favourite of mine, but you know, that's my opinion on it, and I still do think it is a great creature. I'm not dissing it for any of that, just personally, like, way too OP. And give it up for our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, Dominic, Macy Jewski, sorry about that name, and everyone else that's on this list. All the people I've mentioned are paid members, and if you feel like that's something you want a shout out at the end of the video, go join the Patreon or become a paid YouTube member.